Twins vanished after visiting their uncle's farm, but 7 years later, a drone captures something strange in the cornfield. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. In the pale glow of the computer screen, Jessica Mitchell's gaunt face appeared almost ghost-like, her eyes fixed on the drone footage playing on a loop. The bluish light accentuated the hollow circles beneath her eyes, souvenirs from 7 years of sleepless nights. "I knew it, Robert. I always knew you took them," she whispered to the empty apartment, her voice hoarse from disuse. Her small one-bedroom apartment had long ceased to be a home. Instead, it had transformed into a command center for her obsession. The walls were plastered with photographs of her twin sons, Ethan and Noah, their identical smiles frozen at 6 years old, alongside maps of Robert's vast property, with different areas highlighted and annotated in Jessica's increasingly frantic handwriting. She pressed the space bar, rewinding the footage to examine the strange formations in the cornfield once more. The new high-tech drone had been an expensive investment, one she could barely afford on her freelance graphic designer salary, but it was worth every penny. Its sophisticated camera captured details her previous models couldn't, allowing her to survey Robert's property while keeping outside its legal boundaries. Jessica zoomed in on the peculiar patterns in the cornfield, her breath catching as she had done countless times since first noticing them this morning. What initially looked like random variations in the crops revealed something impossible to ignore when viewed from above. 2 identical formations that resembled children's faces looking up at the sky. She traced the outlines with her finger on the screen, a shiver running down her spine. "Ethan? Noah?" she whispered. The memory came unbidden. The twins, laughing as they ran through the cornfield during that fateful family barbecue 7 years ago, their identical mops of brown hair disappearing and reappearing among the tall stalks as they played hide-and-seek. The sound of their laughter carried on the summer breeze. That was the last time she'd seen them. Jessica stood up abruptly, her muscles protesting after hours of stillness. She paced the small living room, stepping over case files and newspaper clippings scattered across the floor. She'd been over it 1,000 times. The official investigation had found nothing conclusive. No bodies, no evidence of abduction, just 2 little boys who seemingly vanished into thin air while visiting their uncle's farm. But Jessica knew. She'd always known it was Robert. Her ex-husband's brother had always been odd, quiet, intense, with an unsettling fixation on the twins. Michael had dismissed her concerns, attributed Robert's quirks to his solitary farmer's lifestyle. But Jessica had seen how Robert watched the boys, like they were specimens rather than children. She grabbed her phone, dialing a number she knew by heart. "Detective Rivera, it's Jessica Mitchell. I found something in Robert's cornfield." "No, not physically there. Drone footage." She paused, listening to the skepticism in Rivera's voicemail greeting. "I know how this sounds, but there are patterns in the crops. They look like faces. My boys' faces. Please call me back." Jessica hung up, her thumb hovering over Michael's contact. They hadn't spoken in months. Their marriage hadn't survived the loss of their children, crumbling under the weight of grief, and Jessica's relentless pursuit of the truth, while Michael chose to move on. She decided against calling him. Not yet. Not until she had something concrete. She returned to the computer, clicking through the previous day's footage, searching for any sign of the pattern's development. How long had they been there? Why hadn't she noticed them before? Exhaustion eventually claimed her, and Jessica fell asleep on the couch, surrounded by frozen images of the cornfield patterns on her computer screen, the faces of her missing children staring up at the sky. A sound jolted her awake. Children's voices calling from beneath the earth. Jessica sat up with a gasp, heart pounding, before realizing it was just another nightmare. The same one she'd had for years, the twins calling for help from underground. their voices growing fainter as dirt filled their mouths. Her phone rang, dispelling the remnants of the dream. "Jessica, it's Rivera." The detective's voice sounded tired but alert. "I got your message. I can meet you this afternoon at the usual place." "I'll be there, thank you." Jessica ended the call, a spark of hope igniting in her chest. She showered quickly, the hot water doing little to ease the tension in her shoulders. As she dressed, Jessica caught sight of herself in the mirror, a woman she barely recognized anymore. At 42, her once vibrant brown hair was now streaked with gray, and fine lines had etched themselves around her eyes and mouth. 7 years of searching had aged her beyond her years. Jessica carefully organized her evidence into a folder. Printouts of the drone images, close-ups of the patterns, and a timeline of Robert's known activities on the farm. She'd learned from past meetings with Rivera to be methodical, to present her findings without the emotional intensity that had made the detective dismiss her theories before. She made herself toast, but could only manage a few bites before her stomach knotted with anxiety. The local morning news played in the background, a cheerful meteorologist announcing the upcoming partial solar eclipse with enthusiasm. "A rare celestial event visible from our area in just a few days," he beamed. Jessica barely registered the information as she gathered her things. Before leaving, she paused at the small shrine-like arrangement of photographs on her bookshelf. The twins on their last birthday, gap-toothed smiles and identical cowlicks. Ethan always the more serious one, his smile a bit reserved. Noah, with mischief perpetually dancing in his eyes. "This time," she promised them, "I'll find you." The coffee shop was busy with the lunch crowd when Rivera arrived. The detective had aged too, her black hair now peppered with silver, but her dark eyes remained sharp and assessing. She'd been the only officer who'd ever taken Jessica's suspicions about Robert seriously, though even her patience had worn thin over the years. "Show me what you've got," Rivera said after ordering coffee, her tone professional but tinged with skepticism. Jessica opened her folder, spreading the printouts methodically. "I've been monitoring Robert's property with a new drone. It has better resolution, longer flight time. 3 days ago, I noticed these formations in the cornfield." Rivera examined the photos, her expression unreadable. "Crop patterns happen naturally, Jessica. Wind damage, irrigation issues. Look at them, Rivera, really look." Jessica traced the outlines. "These aren't random patterns. They're faces. Children's faces looking up at the sky." The detective studied the images more carefully, her professional detachment wavering slightly. "I see the resemblance, but it's them. I know it is. Robert's sending a message, or—" Jessica faltered, unable to articulate the alternative, that somehow her children were creating the patterns themselves. "Even if these patterns are intentional, it's not evidence of a crime. I can't get a warrant based on unusual crop formations, Jessica." "Then what do I do? Just ignore this?" Rivera sighed, rubbing her temples. "Have you shown these to Michael? He still visits Robert regularly, doesn't he?" Jessica stiffened. "We don't talk much anymore." "Maybe you should. He might have noticed something unusual about his brother's behavior. Or he could get you onto the property legally." Jessica nodded reluctantly. Rivera was right. Despite everything, Michael was still her best chance at accessing Robert's farm without breaking the law. After Rivera left, Jessica sat alone, staring at the images of the cornfield faces. The idea of contacting Michael filled her with dread. Their last conversation had ended with him telling her to get professional help, to stop dragging their son's memory through her paranoid conspiracy theories. She sipped her now cold coffee, scrolling through her phone until she found Michael's number. Her finger hovered over it for several long moments before she finally pressed call. To her surprise, he agreed to meet the next day. That night, Jessica drove past their old family home, a modest suburban house now occupied by strangers. She slowed the car, remembering Sunday mornings in the front yard with the twins, their identical laughs as Michael chased them with the garden hose. Back in her apartment, Jessica researched crop patterns, finding articles about natural phenomena, farmers creating designs for tourism, and conspiracy theories about extraterrestrial communications. Nothing that explained the faces in Robert's cornfield. She pulled out an old box of family mementos, searching for something, anything, that might help her understand what was happening. Among birthday cards and school drawings, she found a photo she'd forgotten. The twins, at their 6th birthday party, wearing identical denim overalls, their favorite outfit that summer. The overalls they'd been wearing the day they disappeared. Jessica placed the photo on her desk, beside her computer screen still displaying the cornfield patterns. Something about the image nagged at her, a connection she couldn't quite make. She fell asleep at her desk, the ghost of an idea forming at the edges of her consciousness. Detective Rivera examined the images carefully, shaking her head with skepticism, but then froze as she noticed a detail Jessica had missed. Beside the faces in the cornfield, there was a circular area that appeared artificially cleared, like a glade or a hatch. "What is this?" Jessica leaned closer to the screen, her heart accelerating as Rivera pointed to the circular clearing next to the face-like formations in the cornfield. "It looks deliberately cleared," Rivera said, tracing the perfect circle with her fingertip. "Too uniform to be natural damage." Jessica's mouth went dry. "Like a hatch or entrance?" Rivera's expression remained neutral, but her eyes betrayed concern. "Let's not jump to conclusions. It could be anything. An irrigation system, a small experimental plot." They relocated to a corner booth at the cafe, away from curious ears. The morning crowd bustled around them, the normalcy of their chatter a stark contrast to the images spread on the table between the two women. "Look, Jessica," Rivera said, lowering her voice. "I've always had my doubts about Robert. His alibi for that day was weak, and his behavior during questioning was off. But suspicion isn't evidence." "You've suspected him all along?" Jessica asked, a mixture of vindication and frustration washing over her. Rivera nodded slowly. "In 23 years of police work, I've developed instincts about people. Robert set off every alarm bell I have. But he's smart, careful, never left us anything to work with." "And now we have something," Jessica insisted, tapping the drone images. "What we have are unusual patterns in a cornfield and a circular clearing. No judge I know would issue a warrant based on that, especially considering..." "Considering what?" Rivera hesitated. "Robert has connections in this county. Judge Harmon, who oversees most warrant requests, goes hunting with him twice a year." Jessica slumped back against the booth, defeat threatening to overwhelm her. "So he's untouchable?" "I didn't say that." Rivera straightened, professional determination returning to her features. "Have you considered approaching Michael? He still has contact with Robert, right? Regular visits to the farm?" Jessica's jaw tightened at the mention of her ex-husband. "We're not exactly on speaking terms." "This isn't about your relationship, Jessica. It's about finding out what happened to your boys." Rivera's voice was gentle but firm. Michael might have seen something at the farm, something he didn't realize was important, or he could get you access to the property legally. Jessica stared into her cold coffee, weighing her options. The thought of contacting Michael made her stomach twist with anxiety. But Rivera was right. 7 years of investigation had led to this moment. She couldn't let pride stand in her way now. "I'll call him," she finally agreed. Back in her car, Jessica sat with her phone in hand, Michael's contact information displayed on the screen. Her thumb hovered over the call button as memories flooded back. The screaming matches, the accusations, his gradual withdrawal into denial about Robert's involvement. And finally, the divorce papers delivered to her apartment 3 years after the twins disappeared. She pressed call before she could change her mind. Michael answered on the fourth ring, his voice guarded. "Jessica?" "I need to see you," she said, bypassing pleasantries. "It's about Ethan and Noah. I found something." A heavy sigh came through the speaker. "Jessica, we've been through this. Please, Michael, just one meeting. If you don't think what I found is significant, I won't bother you again." The silence stretched between them, weighted with years of mutual pain. "Fine," he finally said. "Miller's Cafe tomorrow at noon. But Jessica, I mean it. If this is just another conspiracy theory." "It's not, I promise." The following day, Jessica arrived at the cafe 20 minutes early, choosing a table that offered privacy while allowing her to watch the entrance. She'd barely slept, spending the night organizing her evidence and rehearsing what she would say. Michael appeared precisely at noon, punctual as always. 7 years had changed him. His once athletic frame had softened, and streaks of gray shot through his dark hair. The same grief that had aged Jessica had worked on him too, though differently. "Jessica," he nodded, sliding into the chair across from her, his posture rigid with discomfort. "Thank you for coming," she said, suddenly feeling awkward in the presence of the man she'd spent 15 years married to. "Would you like coffee?" "Let's just get to why I'm here." Jessica swallowed her hurt at his coldness and opened her folder. "I've been using a drone to monitor Robert's property," she began, sliding the printed images across the table. Michael's face hardened. "You're still spying on my brother? After all these years?" "Look at the images, Michael, please." Reluctantly, he glanced down. His expression remained impassive as she explained what she'd discovered: the face-like formations, the circular clearing. But she noticed a subtle change in his breathing, a tightness around his eyes. "These are just random patterns in crops," he finally said, pushing the images back toward her. "You're seeing what you want to see." Detective Rivera noticed them too. She agrees they look unusual. "Rivera," Michael scoffed. "Of course she'd encourage your obsession. She's been trying to pin something on Robert since day one." "Because she knows he's involved." Jessica's voice rose, drawing glances from nearby tables. She lowered it again with effort. "Why do you keep defending him?" "Because he's my brother, and he's innocent. Do you have any idea what your accusations have done to him? To his reputation in this town? What about our sons, Michael? Don't they deserve justice?" Michael's face flushed with anger. "Don't you dare suggest I don't care about our boys. I've grieved them every day for 7 years. The difference is, I'm trying to move forward, not wallowing in delusions and destroying what family I have left." "Moving forward?" Jessica hissed. "Is that what you call your regular visits to Robert's farm? The brother you claim is innocent, but still watch like a hawk?" Michael's eyes widened slightly. "How do you—" He cut himself off, running a hand through his hair. "Yes, I visit Robert. He's the only family I have left, and despite your crusade against him, he's been there for me, through everything." "Has he ever acted strangely during these visits? Said anything unusual about the boys?" "No, because he had nothing to do with their disappearance." Michael's fist came down on the table, jostling their cups. "I've been all over that farm over the years, Jessica. There's nothing suspicious there." "Have you seen these patterns in the cornfield?" A fleeting expression crossed Michael's face, too quick to identify but enough to make Jessica lean forward. "You have seen them, haven't you?" "I've seen Robert trying different planting techniques. He's always experimenting with crop yields. That's all this is." "Did you ask him about these specific patterns?" Michael's jaw worked silently for a moment. "This has gone far enough," he said finally. "You need professional help, Jessica. I've told you this for years. This obsession isn't healthy. It's not an obsession to want to know what happened to our children. No, but it is an obsession to spend 7 years trying to frame my brother with increasingly far-fetched theories." Michael's voice rose again. First it was secret rooms in the farmhouse, then bodies buried in the old well, then some nonsense about the twins being kept in the grain silo, and now crop patterns. What's next, Jessica? Alien abduction? His words cut deep, reducing her years of investigation to paranoid fantasies. Jessica fought back tears of frustration. I know what I saw, Michael. Something is wrong at that farm, and Robert is hiding something. The only thing wrong is your inability to accept that sometimes terrible things happen without explanation. Michael stood abruptly, knocking over his coffee cup. The dark liquid spread across the table, seeping into the drone images. I'm done enabling this. Don't contact me again unless you're ready to get help. He stormed out of the cafe, leaving Jessica sitting alone with coffee-stained evidence and the stares of curious patrons. Back in her apartment, Jessica paced furiously, Michael's dismissal ringing in her ears. How could he remain so blind, so deliberately ignorant of the mounting signs? Her gaze fell on the box of family mementos she'd been looking through the night before. Among the scattered photographs was the one of the twins in their denim overalls. Something about it still nagged at her, a connection just beyond her grasp. If Michael wouldn't help, she would have to approach Robert directly. The thought sent a chill through her, but she was out of options. She needed to see the farm for herself, to get close enough to investigate the patterns and the mysterious circular clearing. She needed a pretext, something Robert wouldn't immediately suspect. Jessica rummaged through the memorabilia box again, pulling out old holiday cards and family photographs that included Robert. She gathered them into a small pile, items she could claim she'd found during her move, things she thought Michael might want. A flimsy excuse, but it might get her through the door. The decision made, Jessica felt a surge of nervous energy. Tomorrow, she would drive to Robert's farm unannounced. She would finally face the man she believed had stolen her children, standing on the very ground where they had vanished. As she prepared for bed, Jessica paused at her dresser, where another photograph caught her eye. A faded image she'd overlooked before. It showed Robert and Michael as young boys, perhaps 7 or 8 years old, standing in front of a cornfield on the family farm. Both wore identical denim overalls, strikingly similar to the ones the twins had been wearing the day they disappeared. The morning fog rolled lazily across the fields as Jessica loaded a small cardboard box into her car. She had barely slept, the image of young Robert and Michael in their denim overalls haunting her dreams, merging with memories of her own sons dressed identically the day they vanished. The coincidence felt too deliberate, too calculated to ignore. She checked her phone one last time. No messages from Rivera, no apologetic texts from Michael. She was on her own. The drive to Robert's farm stretched over an hour, taking her from suburban comfort to increasingly isolated countryside. Fields of corn and wheat flanked the narrow road, occasionally broken by weathered farmhouses and rusting equipment. With each mile, Jessica's anxiety mounted, her knuckles whitening on the steering wheel. "You can do this," she whispered to herself. "For Ethan. For Noah." Robert's property appeared ahead, announced by a faded wooden sign reading, "Mitchell Family Farm." The irony wasn't lost on Jessica. This land had been in Michael's family for generations, passed down to Robert when their parents died, while her own Mitchells, her precious boys, had disappeared within its boundaries. The gravel driveway crunched beneath her tires as she approached the 2-story farmhouse. It stood stark against the landscape, white paint peeling slightly at the edges, surrounded by equipment sheds and the vastness of cornfields stretching to the horizon. From ground level, there was no way to discern the patterns she'd seen from above. The corn, a uniform sea of green and gold. Jessica parked beside Robert's mud-splattered pickup truck and sat motionless, gathering her courage. The box of family mementos sat on the passenger seat, her flimsy pretext for this dangerous visit. She took a deep breath, checked that her phone was recording audio in her pocket, and stepped out into the crisp morning air. Before she could reach the porch, the screen door creaked open. Robert Mitchell stood in the doorway, tall and lean, his weathered face a more angular version of Michael's. He wore faded work clothes and a carefully neutral expression, but his eyes, sharp and assessing, betrayed his surprise. "Jessica." Her name hung in the air between them. "This is unexpected." She forced a smile, lifting the box slightly. "I found some old family things while reorganizing. Photos, holiday cards. I thought Michael might want them, but you're not speaking to my brother," Robert finished, his lips curving into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "How thoughtful of you to bring them all the way out here." He stepped aside, gesturing inward with a stiff sweep of his arm. "Please come in. I was just about to make tea." The invitation surprised her. She'd expected resistance, suspicion, perhaps even outright refusal. Instead, Robert was playing the gracious host, ushering her into the house where her children were last seen alive. The interior was immaculately clean, almost antiseptically so. Every surface gleamed, every item precisely placed, giving the impression of a museum rather than a working farmer's home. Jessica's senses heightened, cataloging details. No photographs of the twins displayed anywhere. No evidence they had ever existed in Robert's world. "You've kept the place up," she commented, following him through the living room where floral-patterned furniture sat unused, looking never sat upon. "I appreciate order," Robert replied, leading her into the kitchen. "Have a seat while I put the kettle on." Jessica placed the box on the kitchen table but remained standing, watching as Robert filled an old-fashioned kettle. The kitchen, like the rest of the house, was spotless, incongruously so for a bachelor farmer. No dirty dishes, no crumbs, not even a smudge on the stainless steel refrigerator. "Quite a change since I was last here," she ventured, testing the waters. "For the 4th of July barbecue." Robert's back stiffened almost imperceptibly. 7 years changes many things. "Yes," Jessica agreed, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "It does." Robert turned, gesturing vaguely around them. "Would you like a tour? Michael mentioned you were always fond of this old place." The invitation was unexpected but perfect, exactly what she'd hoped for. "That would be nice." They moved through the house, Robert narrating bland historical details about each room, while Jessica searched for anything unusual. A locked door, a hidden entrance, any sign of her children's presence. But there was nothing, just meticulously maintained emptiness. As they passed a narrow hallway, Robert smoothly stepped in front of her, blocking her view. "Just storage down there," he said casually. "Nothing interesting." Jessica nodded, making a mental note of the hallway's location. "The house seems bigger than I remember." "It's the absence of clutter," Robert replied. "Creates an illusion of space." In what must have been his study, Jessica noticed a framed photograph on the wall, a much younger Robert and Michael standing beside their father, all three dressed in farm clothes. The boys looked about 12 with identical solemn expressions. "You and Michael were close as children," she observed. Robert's expression softened slightly, the first genuine emotion she'd seen. "We were inseparable, 2 peas in a pod," our mother used to say. His gaze drifted to the photograph, then snapped back to Jessica with sudden intensity. "Like your boys." A chill ran through her at the comparison. "Yes, identical twins have a special bond." "Special indeed," Robert murmured. "Did you know identical twins share more than just appearance? They share a cellular connection, a biological synchronicity that fraternal twins like Michael and I could only approximate through behavior." Something in his clinical tone disturbed Jessica deeply. She moved away from him, pretending interest in the bookshelf to mask her discomfort. Scientific journals lined the shelves, with titles relating to agricultural biology, genetic modification, and plant hybridization. "You're quite the scientist for a farmer," she remarked. "Modern farming is science, Robert replied, especially when you're experimenting with new techniques. Like your cornfield patterns? The question hung between them, a sudden disruption to their careful dance. Robert's expression didn't change, but his eyes narrowed slightly. What patterns would those be? He asked, his voice deceptively light. I noticed some unusual formations in your corn from the road, Jessica lied. Different densities, almost like deliberate designs. Robert nodded slowly. Ah, yes. I'm running tests on variable planting densities to maximize yield. Nothing particularly exciting, I'm afraid. He glanced at his watch. The tea must be ready by now. He guided her back toward the kitchen, his hand hovering near her elbow without touching her, steering her away from the hallway they'd passed earlier. I need to use the restroom first, Jessica said. Is it still down that way? Robert hesitated for a fraction of a second. First door on the right, he confirmed, his smile tight. I'll meet you in the kitchen. In the bathroom, Jessica quickly checked her phone to ensure it was still recording. The small, windowless room offered no clues, though she checked behind the shower curtain and examined the walls for any sign of hidden compartments. Finding nothing, she flushed the toilet for credibility and washed her hands, studying her reflection in the mirror. The fear in her eyes was obvious. She took a deep breath to compose herself before stepping back into the hallway. The house was silent, except for the distant sound of Robert moving in the kitchen. Jessica hesitated, then moved quickly toward the forbidden hallway he'd blocked earlier. It was dimly lit, with 3 doors, 2 closed and 1 partially open, revealing what looked like a linen closet. She tried the first closed door and found it locked. The second opened to a small room that indeed appeared to be used for storage, filled with boxes and old furniture. Disappointed, she started back toward the kitchen when something caught her eye. A child's baseball cap wedged between 2 storage boxes, dusty and forgotten. Jessica's breath caught as she recognized it instantly, the blue cap with a red star that had been Noah's favorite. She reached for it with trembling fingers. Jessica. Tea's ready, Robert's voice called from the kitchen, much closer than she expected. She froze, then reluctantly left the cap where it was, memorizing its location. It was the first concrete evidence she'd found in 7 years. In the kitchen, Robert had laid out 2 cups of tea and a plate of store-bought cookies. On the wall beside the refrigerator hung a large whiteboard covered with what appeared to be a planting and irrigation schedule, rows and columns neatly filled with Robert's precise handwriting. Jessica's eyes widened as she recognized the grid pattern. It corresponded perfectly to the aerial view of the cornfields, and there, in the exact locations where she'd seen the face-like formations, Robert had marked unusual symbols that didn't appear anywhere else on the chart. Sugar, Robert offered, standing too close behind her. No, thank you. Jessica moved casually toward the whiteboard, gesturing at it. Quite the sophisticated system you have here. Robert smiled thinly. Farming is precision work these days. Every section of field requires specific attention. Jessica nodded, pulling out her phone as if checking messages. Do you mind if I take a quick call? It's my boss. Of course. Robert stepped away, turning his attention to the refrigerator. With his back turned, Jessica quickly raised her phone and snapped several photos of the planting grid. The sound of the camera shutter, though faint, seemed deafening in the quiet kitchen. Robert whirled around instantly, his eyes locking on the phone in her hand. His face transformed, the polite mask slipping, to reveal something cold and calculating. What exactly are you doing, Jessica? He asked, his voice dangerously soft. Just checking my messages, she lied, backing toward the door. Actually, I should probably get going. Thank you for the tour. Robert moved with unexpected speed, blocking her path to the exit. Let me see your phone. Excuse me? Your phone, he repeated, his hand extended. Give it to me. I don't think so. Jessica clutched her phone tighter, adrenaline surging through her body. Move aside, Robert. You've never understood, have you? He said, advancing slowly. What's happening here is beyond your comprehension, beyond anyone's. Jessica backed away, bumping into the kitchen table. I understand enough. Where are they, Robert? What did you do to my sons? They're part of something greater now, he whispered, lunging suddenly for her phone. Jessica reacted instinctively, slamming her elbow into his solar plexus. As Robert doubled over, she shoved past him and ran for the front door, terror giving her speed. She burst outside, sprinting to her car with Robert's footsteps pounding behind her. Her fingers fumbled with the keys, managing to unlock the door just as Robert reached the porch. She threw herself into the driver's seat, locked the doors, and started the engine with shaking hands. As she reversed violently down the driveway, Jessica glanced in her rearview mirror and felt her blood freeze. Standing on the porch beside Robert, watching her panicked escape with an inscrutable expression, was Michael, her ex-husband, who had claimed to have no plans to visit his brother today. Jessica's hands trembled violently on the steering wheel as she sped away from Robert's farm, her mind reeling from what she'd just seen. Michael, at the farm, standing next to his brother like a silent sentinel. The betrayal cut deeper than she could have imagined. She checked her rearview mirror repeatedly, half expecting to see Robert's pickup truck in pursuit. The rural landscape blurred past her window, fields of corn and wheat indistinguishable in her panic. Focus, she whispered to herself, forcing her breathing to slow. Just get back to town. When she finally reached the outskirts of Millfield, Jessica pulled into an empty church parking lot, killed the engine, and sat in silence, trying to process what had happened. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving her shaky and nauseated. She reached for her phone, eager to examine the photos she'd taken of Robert's irrigation grid. The images would prove the connection between the grid markings and the face-like formations in the cornfield. Evidence, at last, something concrete to show Rivera. Her finger trembled as she navigated to her photo gallery. The most recent images appeared, and Jessica's heart sank. Where clear photos of Robert's whiteboard should have been, there were only corrupted files, distorted, pixelated blurs with strange digital artifacts running through them. No, she whispered, frantically trying to open each image. No, no, no! None of the photos were salvageable. It was as if they'd been deliberately scrambled, though she couldn't imagine how. Had Robert somehow interfered with her phone? Or was it just terrible luck, a glitch at the worst possible moment? Jessica leaned back against the headrest, closing her eyes in despair. She'd been so close. She'd found Noah's cap, seen the suspicious markings on Robert's planting grid, confirmed her worst fears about his involvement, and now she had nothing to show for it but corrupted files and the disturbing image of Michael standing alongside his brother. Her phone rang, startling her. Detective Rivera's name flashed on the screen. Jessica, Rivera said when she answered. Where are you? I've been trying to reach you for hours. I went to Robert's farm, Jessica confessed, her voice hollow. You did what? Rivera's tone sharpened. Alone? After everything we discussed? I had to see for myself. And I was right, Rivera. He has them. Or he did something to them. I found Noah's baseball cap hidden away, and there's a planting grid on his wall with markings that match exactly where those patterns are in the cornfield. Did you get evidence of any of this? I tried, Jessica said, frustration cracking her voice. I took photos of the grid, but they're all corrupted, and I couldn't take the cap without him noticing. Rivera sighed heavily. Jessica, you know I can't do anything without evidence. And now Robert will be on high alert, which makes any official investigation that much harder. There's something else, Jessica said, her voice dropping. Michael was there. Your ex-husband? I thought you said he wasn't visiting Robert today. That's what he told me. But when I was leaving, I saw him standing on the porch with Robert. They were watching me together, Rivera, like they were in on it together. There was a long pause on the line. That complicates things, Rivera finally said. Look, come to the station. We need to talk properly, and I want to see if our tech team can recover those corrupted images. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Jessica started her car, then paused as her phone chimed with a text notification. Unknown number. She opened the message, and her breath caught in her throat. The boys are planted where the sun and moon meet. She stared at the cryptic message, reading it over and over. The sun and moon meeting. The eclipse. The one the meteorologist had mentioned was coming in a few days. Or was it something else entirely? Jessica took a screenshot of the message before it could mysteriously disappear and drove directly to the police station. Rivera was waiting for her in the small, cluttered office she'd occupied for the past 15 years. Photographs of solved cases lined the walls, alongside commendations and her police academy graduation picture. Among them, partially hidden behind a filing cabinet, was a photo of Ethan and Noah, the missing persons flyer that had been distributed 7 years ago. Jessica handed over her phone. Here are the corrupted photos and the text message I just received. Rivera examined the phone, her expression darkening. This message came through just now, after you left the farm? Jessica nodded. From an unknown number. We can trace that, Rivera said, already typing on her computer. And I'll get our tech specialist to look at those corrupted files. While Rivera worked, Jessica paced the small office, her mind racing. What did he mean about the boys being planted, and where the sun and moon meet? Could refer to the eclipse, Rivera mused, echoing Jessica's earlier thought. It's in 3 days. Or it could be a location, maybe somewhere on the property where sunlight and moonlight intersect in a particular way. Jessica shook her head. I don't know. But someone's trying to tell me something. Someone who knows what happened to my boys. Rivera's computer pinged. The text came from a burner phone, she said, reading the screen. Purchased yesterday at Miller's convenience store out on Route 16. That's only a few miles from Robert's farm, Jessica noted, her pulse quickening. Let me check something. Rivera typed rapidly, then turned her monitor so Jessica could see. Miller's has security cameras. Here's the footage from yesterday around the time that phone was activated. They watched grainy footage of a young Hispanic man in his early 20s purchasing the phone, looking nervously over his shoulder as he paid in cash. I know him, Jessica said, leaning closer to the screen. He's one of the farmhands I saw at Robert's place. He was working near the equipment shed when I arrived. Ernesto Diaz, Rivera read from her screen. Seasonal worker, been employed at the Mitchell farm for the past 2 years. No criminal record. Work visa in order. He must know something, Jessica said. Why else would he risk sending me that message? Rivera nodded, thoughtfully. It's something. Not enough for a warrant, but definitely worth pursuing. I'll try to locate him for questioning. He'll never talk officially, Jessica argued. He'd lose his job, maybe get deported. We need to approach him differently. Before Rivera could respond, her office door burst open. Michael stood in the doorway, his face flushed with anger and something else. Fear. We need to talk, he said to Jessica, ignoring Rivera completely. Now. Rivera stood, her hand moving instinctively toward her sidearm. Mr. Mitchell, this is an official police interview. You can't just barge in here. It's about the boys, Michael said, his eyes never leaving Jessica's face. I need to speak with my wife. Ex-wife, he corrected himself. Jessica studied him, noting the sweat beading on his forehead, the slight tremor in his hands. Whatever you have to say, you can say it in front of Detective Rivera. Michael hesitated, then closed the door behind him. I saw the patterns, he admitted finally. In Robert's cornfield, 2 weeks ago. Jessica's heart skipped a beat. And you didn't tell me? I asked Robert about them. He said they were agricultural experiments testing different planting densities. Michael ran a hand through his hair, looking suddenly exhausted. I believed him because I wanted to believe him. Because the alternative was... Was what? Jessica pressed. I've been having dreams, Michael said, his voice dropping to nearly a whisper. For years now. Dreams where I hear the boys calling from underground, crying for help. I thought I was going crazy. He looked up, his eyes haunted. How could anyone bury children alive for years? Jessica felt a chill run through her at his words. That's why you were at the farm today. You've been investigating too. Michael nodded miserably. After you showed me those drone images, I couldn't ignore it anymore. The patterns matched my dreams exactly. I went to confront Robert, but he was already dealing with you. And then you ran, and he was different. Talking about special planting conditions and long-term experiments. It didn't make sense. Rivera watched Michael carefully. Mr. Mitchell, are you saying you believe your brother might be involved in your son's disappearance? I don't know what to believe anymore, Michael said brokenly. But I know we need to find out what's under those patterns in the cornfield. Jessica shared a look with Rivera, then showed Michael the text message. Someone from the farm sent this. A worker named Ernesto Diaz. Michael read it, his face paling. The sun and moon. The eclipse. It's in 3 days. We need to get back to that farm, Jessica said firmly. Tonight, after dark. Breaking into private property is a crime, Rivera warned, though her tone lacked conviction. So is kidnapping, Jessica countered. So is whatever Robert did to my sons. Michael straightened, a new determination replacing his earlier uncertainty. I'm coming with you. I thought you might, Jessica said, surprising herself with the lack of anger she felt toward him now. Their shared goal, finding their sons, temporarily eclipsed 7 years of bitterness. They spent the afternoon planning their night expedition. Rivera, unable to officially sanction their activities but unwilling to stop them, provided information about police patrol schedules in the rural areas and promised to be on standby if they called. As dusk approached, Jessica and Michael met at the edge of town, both dressed in dark clothing. In Jessica's car trunk were flashlights, the drone, a shovel, and a first aid kit. Neither spoke about what they might find. The drive to Robert's farm was tense with anticipation and dread. They parked half a mile away, hidden behind an abandoned barn, and continued on foot through a neighboring field. The night was clear, stars glittering coldly overhead as they approached the vast cornfield where the patterns had appeared. Robert's farmhouse stood, dark and silent in the distance. He was either asleep or away. This way, Jessica whispered, leading Michael through the rows of corn using her phone's GPS to navigate to the coordinates of the patterns. The cornfield was different at night, ominous and disorienting. The stalks, reaching well above their heads, rustled with each breath of wind, creating whispers that seemed almost like distant voices. Jessica tried to ignore the way the sound raised goosebumps on her arms. After 20 minutes of careful navigation, they reached the area where the drone had captured the face-like formations. From ground level, the patterns were impossible to discern, just corn planted in varying densities. But the effect, when viewed from above, was undeniable. We need to find the center, Jessica said, checking her phone again, where the circular clearing is. They followed the GPS coordinates, pushing through increasingly dense sections of corn, until suddenly breaking through into a small, perfectly circular clearing, about 15 feet in diameter. In the moonlight, Jessica could see that the ground here was different, looser, as if recently disturbed. Michael unfolded the shovel he'd been carrying and began to dig without a word. The only sound was his labored breathing and the metallic scrape of the shovel against occasional stones. Jessica knelt beside the growing hole, brushing away loose soil with her hands. After digging about 2 feet down, the shovel struck something solid with a dull clang. Michael scraped away more dirt, revealing a flat metal surface. It's some kind of hatch, Jessica whispered, her heart pounding so hard she could barely hear her own voice. Together, They cleared the remaining dirt, exposing a round metal hatch about 3 feet in diameter. It had no visible handle, but its edge was pierced with small, regular holes, ventilation ports. Michael tried to lift it, straining against the metal, but it wouldn't budge. "It's locked from the inside," he panted. Jessica examined the ventilation holes, then pulled out her phone. These holes might be big enough. She positioned her phone's camera against one of the openings, activated the flash, and quickly snapped a photo. With trembling fingers, she checked the image, Michael leaning close to see. What the flash had illuminated made both of them freeze in horror. A wall covered with children's drawings of 2 identical boys standing in a cornfield, looking up at the sky. And in the corner of the frame, partially visible, lay a small, worn shoe, the exact match to the ones Ethan and Noah had been wearing when they disappeared. Suddenly, lights blazed to life at the farmhouse in the distance. A dog's bark shattered the night's stillness, followed by another, then several more. The sound of chains being released echoed across the fields. "Run!" Michael hissed, grabbing Jessica's arm. "Now!" As they stood to flee, Jessica and Michael barely made it back to their car, running through the darkness while dogs chased them to the property's fence. During their escape, Jessica lost her phone somewhere in the cornfield. Jessica and Michael huddled in her car, their breath coming in ragged gasps as they sped away from Robert's farm. The headlights carved a narrow path through the darkness, the surrounding countryside a black void, punctuated only by occasional farmhouse lights. Neither spoke for several miles, the horror of what they had discovered still fresh in their minds. "My phone," Jessica finally broke the silence, her voice hollow. All the evidence was on it. Michael's hands tightened on the wheel. The photo of whatever's under that hatch. "God, Jessica, those drawings. They're alive," she whispered, the realization simultaneously beautiful and terrible. After 7 years, they're alive somewhere underneath that cornfield. Michael pulled the car onto a deserted roadside turnout and killed the engine. In the sudden silence, the weight of their discovery pressed down on them. He turned to Jessica, his face ghostly in the moonlight, filtering through the windshield. "I should have believed you," he said, his voice cracking. "All these years. You were right about Robert." Jessica studied her ex-husband's profile, seeing the devastation etched into the lines of his face. The anger she'd carried for years began to dissolve, replaced by a shared purpose that transcended their broken marriage. "I need to know everything, Michael. Why were you at the farm today? What made you finally suspect your brother?" Michael stared straight ahead, his eyes fixed on the darkness beyond the windshield. "The dream started about a year after the boys disappeared. So vivid. I could hear them calling from underground, their voices muffled by dirt. I'd wake up screaming, clawing at my sheets like I was digging." He paused, swallowing hard. "I told myself it was just grief, guilt. My therapist said the same thing, but they never stopped. And then 2 weeks ago I was helping Robert with some equipment and saw those patterns from the tractor. When I asked about them, he became different. Started talking about specialized growing conditions and longitudinal studies." "You should have told me," Jessica said softly. "How could I? We barely spoke except to argue, and I still couldn't believe. He's my brother, Jessica, my twin. Not identical like our boys, but we shared everything growing up. How could I accept that he would take our children?" The question hung in the air between them, unanswerable. "We need to go to Rivera," Jessica finally said. "Tell her what we found." "With what proof? Your phone is gone, and Robert will have guards watching the farm now. She already said she couldn't get a warrant without concrete evidence." Jessica leaned back against the headrest, frustration washing over her. "Then we find Ernesto, the farmhand who sent the message. He must know something. He's been trying to communicate with us." They drove back to town in contemplative silence, the weight of their discoveries making even breathing feel like an effort. Jessica directed Michael to her apartment building, both of them too wired to separate yet too exhausted for further action tonight. Her small apartment felt like a sanctuary after the terrors of the cornfield. Michael stood awkwardly in the entryway, surveying the wall of investigation that had once infuriated him, now a testament to Jessica's unwavering belief in their son's survival. "You never gave up," he said quietly. "How could I?" She moved to the kitchen, starting coffee they both desperately needed. "They're my children." "Our children," Michael corrected gently. "And I gave up on them, on you." Jessica paused, the coffee scoop suspended over the filter. "We can't change the past 7 years, Michael, but we can find them now." They spent the remainder of the night planning, the familiar rhythm of working together, easing some of the tension between them. By morning, they had a rudimentary strategy: locate Ernesto Diaz, learn what he knew, and return to the farm better prepared. Rivera arrived at Jessica's apartment early, dark circles under her eyes suggesting she'd slept as little as they had. She listened to their account of the previous night with growing concern. "A metal hatch in the middle of a cornfield," she repeated, shaking her head, "and children's drawings underneath. If you had the photo—" "But we don't," Jessica said flatly. "My phone is somewhere in Robert's cornfield, probably already found and destroyed." Rivera sighed heavily. "I can't get a warrant based on your testimony alone, especially given your history with this case. Judge Harmon would never sign off on it without physical evidence, and he's already annoyed about the previous searches of Robert's property." "What about the text message?" Michael asked. "From the farmhand?" "A cryptic text from a burner phone isn't enough either, and attempting to question Ernesto Diaz officially would alert Robert immediately." Rivera stood, adjusting her holster with the practiced motion of someone who'd worn it for decades. "I'm not saying I don't believe you. I'm saying my hands are tied legally." "So we're on our own," Jessica concluded. Rivera hesitated at the door. "Officially, yes. Unofficially, be careful. Robert has friends in this county. Powerful ones." After Rivera left, Michael paced the small living room, agitation evident in every movement. "We could confront Robert directly, the two of us together. Force him to show us what's under that hatch." Jessica shook her head. "He's dangerous, Michael. You saw how he reacted yesterday, and now he knows we're onto him." She tapped the screenshot of the cryptic text message. "Our best bet is finding Ernesto. He sent this message for a reason." They spent the morning researching the seasonal worker. Rivera had provided his employment information. He lived in a small trailer park that housed migrant workers, about 5 miles from Robert's farm. By early afternoon, they were driving through the trailer park, a dusty collection of aging mobile homes with laundry strung between them. Children played in the dirt, while women chatted in Spanish beside communal washing stations. "Number 17, Jessica said, pointing to a small blue trailer at the end of a row. They approached cautiously, aware of curious eyes watching the unfamiliar car. Jessica knocked on the metal door, wincing at the hollow sound that echoed through the quiet afternoon. After a long moment, the door creaked open a few inches, revealing a young man's wary face, the same one they'd seen in the convenience store security footage. "Ernesto Diaz?" Jessica asked quietly. Fear flashed across his features. He attempted to close the door, but Michael blocked it with his foot. "We're not here to cause trouble," Michael said quickly. "We got your message. About the boys." Ernesto's eyes darted between them and to the surrounding trailers, checking, if anyone was watching. Finally, he opened the door just wide enough to let them slip inside. The trailer's interior was spare but neat. A small table, sagging couch, and kitchenette area where a pot of beans simmered on a hot plate. Christian imagery adorned the walls alongside a small shrine with candles and photographs. "You shouldn't be here," Ernesto said in accented English, his voice barely above a whisper. "He has eyes everywhere." "Robert?" Jessica asked. What do you know about him, about our sons? Ernesto sat on the edge of the couch, his hands twisting nervously in his lap. I started working at the farm 2 years ago. Good job, better pay than most places. But strange things happen there. At night, Mr. Robert goes to the cornfields with supplies. Food, water, blankets. Michael leaned forward. You've seen him? Ernesto nodded. Many times. I sleep in the equipment shed sometimes when it's too late to return here. I see him walking with bags, always to the same place. The place where the corn grows differently. Did you ever follow him? Jessica asked. Once, Ernesto admitted, crossing himself. I saw him open something in the ground. And I heard... He faltered, his eyes widening at the memory. Voices. Children's voices coming from below the earth. Jessica's hand found Michael's, squeezing it tightly. What did they say? Did you see them? No, just voices. Talking to Mr. Robert, asking about plants and sunlight. Ernesto shuddered. When I asked him the next day about the voices, he told me they were corn spirits, and if I spoke of them to anyone, they would come for me too. I believed him then. I was afraid. What changed? Michael asked. Why contact us now? The patterns appeared in the corn, Ernesto said, like faces looking at the sky. And last week I heard Mr. Robert talking on his phone about a final stage happening during the eclipse. He said... Ernesto swallowed hard. He said 7 years of preparation will culminate when sun and moon align. It didn't sound good. It sounded like sacrifice. Jessica felt cold despite the trailer's stuffy warmth. The eclipse is in 2 days. That's why I sent the message, Ernesto confirmed. You need to find them before then. Whatever Mr. Robert is planning, it happens during the eclipse. We need to get back to that hatch, Michael said. Tonight. Ernesto shook his head violently. No, he has security now, men with guns patrolling the cornfield. After you came yesterday, he hired them. Said there were thieves trying to steal his research. Jessica and Michael exchanged dismayed glances. Thank you for your help, Jessica said, pressing a business card with her number into Ernesto's hand. If you see or hear anything else, please contact me. Ernesto nodded, escorting them quickly to the door and checking outside before letting them leave. The fear in his eyes stayed with Jessica as they walked back to the car. When they reached the vehicle, Jessica stopped short, her hand flying to her mouth in shock. The car's windows had been smashed, glass glittering on the seats and dashboard. On the windshield, someone had written a message using what appeared to be a mixture of soil and something dark and viscous. Some seeds need to stay buried. Jessica stared at the vandalized car in horror, the message on the windshield sending a chill through her body despite the afternoon heat. The dark substance mixed with soil glistened wetly in the sunlight, its earthy smell mingling with something coppery and organic. Get in the car, Michael, she said, her voice tight with fear. We need to leave. Now. Michael hesitated, transfixed by the message. How did they find us so quickly? It doesn't matter. We're not safe here. Jessica brushed glass from the driver's seat and slid in, ignoring the shards that crunched beneath her. Michael followed, carefully closing the passenger door as if afraid it might shatter completely. They drove in tense silence. Jessica, constantly checking the rearview mirror for signs of pursuit. The violated car felt exposed, the broken windows allowing the rush of air to drown out any attempt at conversation until they reached the town limits. We need to call Rivera, Michael said once they could hear each other again. Jessica nodded, pulling into the parking lot of a busy supermarket where they would be less conspicuous. She used Michael's phone to dial the detective. Someone's watching us, Jessica said the moment Rivera answered. They vandalized my car while we were talking to Ernesto. Left a message. Some seeds need to stay buried. Rivera's sharp intake of breath was audible. Where are you now? Safeway parking lot on Main Street. Stay there. I'm 10 minutes out. While they waited, Jessica noticed Michael staring at the message on the windshield, his expression hardening from fear to anger. "All these years," he said quietly, "I defended him, made excuses for him. What kind of monster takes children and keeps them underground for 7 years? What has he been doing to them?" Jessica had no answer that wouldn't deepen their shared horror. Instead, she reached across the seat and took his hand, a gesture that would have been unthinkable just days ago. 7 years of bitterness momentarily suspended by the weight of their discovery. Rivera arrived in an unmarked car, her expression grim as she examined the vandalized vehicle and the threatening message. "This substance," she said, carefully touching the edge of the writing with a gloved finger. "It's soil mixed with what looks like plant sap, but there's something else in it." She didn't need to verbalize her concern that the dark reddish tint might be blood. "I'll have it analyzed," she promised, scraping a sample into an evidence bag. "And I'll report the vandalism, but it won't lead to a warrant," Jessica finished for her. "We know." Rivera studied them both. "You two need to lie low. Whoever did this is sending a clear message that they know you're asking questions and they're watching you." They followed Rivera to the police station in Michael's car, which he'd left parked near Jessica's apartment. While Rivera filed the report, Jessica and Michael sat in a small conference room, the gravity of their situation settling over them. "Let's go back to your place and regroup," Michael suggested. "We need to figure out our next steps before the eclipse." Jessica nodded, exhaustion beginning to set in as the adrenaline ebbed. But when they arrived at her apartment building 20 minutes later, they found the door to her unit ajar, splinters of wood around the frame where it had been forced open. They backed away immediately, returning to the car to call Rivera again. Within minutes, patrol officers arrived to clear the apartment, followed shortly by Rivera herself. "They took everything," Jessica said numbly, standing in the middle of her living room. All her research materials, the drone footage, her notebooks, the maps of Robert's property, even her computer, were gone. The wall that had been covered with photographs and notes was bare, except for a few torn edges of paper and stripped tape. "Professional job," Rivera remarked, examining the lock. "Quick and targeted. They knew exactly what they were looking for." "My entire investigation," Jessica whispered. 7 years of work. Michael put his arm around her shoulders, an automatic gesture of comfort that she didn't pull away from. "Not everything," he said quietly. "We still have what we saw last night, what Ernesto told us today. And most importantly, we know the boys are alive." Rivera finished speaking with the officers and turned to Jessica and Michael. "You can't stay here," she said firmly. "Whoever did this might come back, especially if they think you have more evidence hidden somewhere." "They can stay at my place," came a voice from the doorway. Detective Rivera's partner, Officer Chen, stood there with a concerned expression. "My sister's out of town and her house is empty. It's in a gated community with security cameras. They'd be safe there until we figure this out." Rivera nodded gratefully. "Perfect. I'll have a patrol car do regular drive-bys as well." Within an hour, Jessica and Michael were settled in a modest but comfortable home in Millfield's newest subdivision. Officer Chen had stocked the refrigerator with basics and shown them the security system before leaving them with strict instructions to keep the doors locked and curtains drawn. Alone in the strange house, Jessica felt the full impact of the day's events crash over her. She sat heavily on the couch, her head in her hands. "We've lost everything, Michael. All the evidence, my phone with the photo of what's under that hatch. How are we going to prove what Robert's doing?" Michael sat beside her, close but not touching. "We'll find a way. The eclipse is in less than 48 hours. Whatever Robert's planning, that's our deadline." Jessica looked up suddenly. "Ernesto said Robert hired armed security after our break-in last night. That means he's worried. He knows we're getting close." "But we can't get past armed guards," Michael pointed out. "And Rivera can't get a warrant without evidence." There has to be another way to access that hatch, Jessica insisted, standing to pace the small living room. Underground tunnels, a secondary entrance. Robert couldn't have built an entire subterranean structure without some kind of emergency exit. Michael's eyes widened with sudden realization. The old grain silo, he said, on the north side of the property. It's been abandoned for decades, but Robert never tore it down. Said it was part of the farm's heritage. Could it connect to whatever's under the cornfield? It's possible. The silo has a deep foundation, and it's less than a quarter mile from where we found the hatch. Jessica felt a spark of hope ignite. We need to check it out. Tonight. Michael nodded, his expression resolute. I'll call Rivera. See if she can run interference if we get caught. Maybe create a distraction on the other side of the property. As darkness fell, they prepared for another incursion onto Robert's land. Dressed in dark clothing and armed with flashlights, a digital camera, and Michael's hunting knife, they drove toward the farm in Officer Chen's borrowed car. Rivera had agreed to help, positioning herself in an unmarked vehicle on the road that ran along the southern edge of the property. If necessary, she would create a distraction to draw away Robert's security. They parked a half-mile from the farm, in the shadow of an abandoned hunting shack. The night was clear and cool, a brilliant canopy of stars illuminating their path across the neighboring field toward the old grain silo that stood like a sentinel at the edge of Robert's property. No dogs, Michael whispered, as they crouched at the property line. And the security seems concentrated around the house and the cornfield. The silo loomed ahead, a hulking cylinder of concrete and rusted metal against the night sky. They moved toward it in short bursts, freezing whenever the distant flashlight beams of the security guards swept across the fields. The silo's main entrance was padlocked, but Michael discovered a rusted maintenance hatch near the base that yielded with a protesting groan when forced. They slipped inside, the musty darkness enveloping them immediately. Jessica switched on her flashlight, the beam cutting through years of dust and cobwebs. The interior was hollow and vast, the concrete floor cracked with age and disuse. But it wasn't empty. Against one wall stood a modern metal door, its gleaming surface incongruous against the decrepit surroundings. That doesn't belong here, Michael whispered, approaching the door cautiously. Jessica followed, her flashlight beam revealing a keypad lock beside the door. Electronic security in an abandoned silo. This has to be it. Michael examined the keypad. We need a code. 4 digits from the wear patterns on the buttons. Jessica thought back to the irrigation grid in Robert's kitchen. The markings on his planting chart, some of them were numbers. 7239, I think. Michael entered the sequence, holding his breath. The keypad beeped softly, and a green light flashed. The door clicked open. Beyond it lay a narrow concrete staircase descending into darkness. The air that wafted up was surprisingly fresh, with an undertone of something organic, like a greenhouse. They descended slowly, the stairs taking them deeper underground than seemed possible from the silo's external appearance. At the bottom, another door awaited them, this one with a small window at eye level. Jessica peered through the glass and gasped. Michael, she whispered, her voice trembling. Look. Beyond the door stretched a long, dimly lit corridor, lined with what appeared to be growing chambers. Glass-walled rooms filled with elaborate hydroponic systems. And moving between them, barely visible in the low green-tinged light, were 2 thin figures in matching clothes. It's them, Michael breathed, his face pressed against the window beside Jessica's. Our boys. The figures were too distant to make out clearly, but their identical movements, the synchronicity of their actions as they tended to the plants, was unmistakable. After 7 years, Ethan and Noah were alive, moving like pale ghosts through an underground garden. Jessica reached for the door handle, but Michael caught her wrist. Wait, he cautioned. We don't know what we're walking into. There could be alarms, more guards. Before they could decide on a course of action, a sound from above made them both freeze. The metallic groan of the silo's maintenance hatch being opened. Someone was following them. They pressed themselves into a small alcove beneath the stairs, barely breathing as footsteps descended. A beam of light swept the stairwell, passing inches from their hiding place. "The sensors picked up activity in the north entrance," came a voice Jessica recognized with a jolt, not Robert's, but Michael's brother-in-law, Sheriff Daniels, who had led the original investigation into the twins' disappearance. "Check the hydroponic chambers and report back. And remember, nobody goes in those rooms except Dr. Mitchell himself." As they returned to the car after speaking with Ernesto, Jessica and Michael found the vehicle vandalized, with a message written on the parabrisa with what appeared terrifyingly similar to moist earth mixed with corn sap. "Some seeds need to stay buried." Jessica and Michael barely made it back to Officer Chen's borrowed car, their hearts pounding with equal measures of elation and terror. The revelation that Sheriff Daniels was somehow involved had stunned them both into silence until they were well away from Robert's property. "The sheriff," Jessica finally whispered as they drove toward town, her voice ragged with disbelief. "He investigated the disappearance. He told us to our faces that he'd done everything possible to find our boys." Michael's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. "And all this time he knew. He was helping Robert keep them underground." The betrayal cut deep, adding another layer to the horror they'd uncovered. Not just Robert, but the county sheriff, the very person tasked with finding their children, had been complicit in their captivity. The corruption reached further than they'd imagined. "We have to call Rivera," Jessica said, already reaching for Michael's phone. "She needs to know her superior is involved." Michael shook his head. "Not over the phone. We don't know who else might be listening. And Rivera reports directly to Daniels. For all we know, she could be involved too." "No," Jessica said firmly. "If Rivera were part of this, she wouldn't have helped us this far. She's the only law enforcement we can trust right now." They drove in tense silence to the safe house, constantly checking for signs of pursuit. Every passing car, every distant set of headlights triggered a spike of adrenaline. By the time they reached the security gate of the gated community, both were strung tight with nervous exhaustion. Inside, with the doors locked and curtains drawn, Jessica paced the living room while Michael stood guard at the window, watching the street through a narrow gap in the blinds. "We saw them, Michael. They're alive." Jessica's voice broke on the last word. 7 years underground, tending those plants. "What has Robert been doing to them?" "I don't know," Michael answered, his tone hollow. "But we're going to get them out. Tomorrow, before the eclipse." A soft knock at the door froze them both. Michael motioned for Jessica to stay back as he approached cautiously, peering through the peephole. "It's Rivera," he whispered, relief evident in his voice as he unlocked the door. The detective entered quickly, her expression grave. "Are you both all right? The patrol officer reported your car returning an hour ago." "We found them," Jessica said without preamble. "Ethan and Noah, they're alive in some kind of underground facility beneath Robert's property. And Sheriff Daniels is involved." Rivera's face paled. "Daniels? Are you certain?" "We heard his voice," Michael confirmed. "He was giving orders to someone, talking about hydroponic chambers that only Robert was allowed to enter." Rivera sat heavily on the nearest chair, processing this information. "This is worse than I imagined. If Daniels is involved, that explains why the original investigation was shut down so quickly, why my concerns were dismissed." "We need to get the boys out," Jessica insisted. "Tonight, before Robert realizes we know about the silo entrance." "Not tonight," Rivera said firmly. "If you're right about Daniels, half the sheriff's department could be compromised. We need to be strategic." "The eclipse is tomorrow," Michael reminded them. "Ernesto," said Robert, "talked about it being the final stage of whatever he's been doing to our sons for 7 years." Rivera nodded grimly. Then we have less than 24 hours to plan a rescue and gather enough evidence to bring charges that will stick, not just against Robert, but against everyone involved. They spent the next hour outlining options, each increasingly desperate. A direct confrontation with Robert seemed their only choice, given the corruption in local law enforcement and the imminent eclipse deadline. "I'll contact the state police," Rivera said. "They can override local jurisdiction, but it will take time to convince them. Time we don't have." A sudden noise from the front of the house silenced their discussion, the distinct sound of glass breaking. Michael moved instantly to the window. "Black SUV out front," he reported tensely. "Two men approaching the house." "Back door," Rivera ordered, drawing her service weapon. "Now." They hurried through the kitchen toward the rear exit, but before they could reach it, the back door crashed inward, revealing the silhouette of a man with a flashlight. Rivera raised her gun, identifying herself as police, but the intruder was faster. Something small and metallic flew through the air, hitting the detective in the chest. She collapsed instantly, her body convulsing before going still. "Taser," Michael hissed, pulling Jessica behind him as they retreated toward the hallway. The sound of footsteps from the front door told them they were being surrounded. Michael grabbed a kitchen knife as they backed into a small utility room, locking the flimsy door behind them. "The window," Jessica whispered, already pushing aside cleaning supplies to reach the small ground-level window. It was barely large enough for them to squeeze through, but they had no choice. Michael forced it open and helped Jessica through first, then followed, tearing his shirt on the window frame in his haste. They found themselves in a small side yard, concealed momentarily by ornamental bushes. "The car is blocked," Michael whispered. "We'll have to go on foot." They crept along the side of the house, then sprinted across the neighboring yard when they heard the utility room door being broken down behind them. Running through the planned community's manicured lawns, they eventually reached a small park where they paused, gasping for breath. "Rivera," Jessica panted. "We have to go back for her." "We can't," Michael said grimly. "They were waiting for us, Jessica. They knew exactly where we were staying." "How? Officer Chen was the only one who knew." "Exactly. The department is compromised, just like Rivera suspected." Michael ran a hand through his hair, thinking rapidly. "We need to get somewhere safe, then figure out how to reach Robert's farm by morning." They continued moving through the darkness, avoiding streetlights and main roads. Without a car or phones, their options were severely limited. After an hour of cautious progress, they reached the outskirts of town, where Michael led them to a small storage facility. "I rent a unit here," he explained, approaching a keypad at the gate. "After the divorce, I needed somewhere to keep things from our old house, things I couldn't bear to look at but couldn't throw away." The storage locker contained furniture and boxes, but also camping equipment that Michael had once used for family trips, including a tent, sleeping bags, and a small propane stove. More importantly, it held a locked cabinet that Michael opened to reveal a hunting rifle and ammunition. "I never thought I'd need this against my own brother," he said quietly as he checked the weapon. They spent an uncomfortable night in the storage unit, taking turns keeping watch. By dawn, they had formulated a desperate plan. They would confront Robert directly, armed with the knowledge of what lay beneath his farm and the determination of parents who had nothing left to lose. They walked the 3 miles to Michael's apartment, where his backup car, an old pickup truck Robert had never seen, was parked in the underground garage. The risk of returning was high, but they needed transportation to reach the farm. The apartment appeared untouched when they cautiously entered. Michael grabbed clean clothes, more ammunition, and a pair of binoculars before they left, locking the door behind them. As they drove toward Robert's farm, the morning sun illuminated a sky that was already different, the coming eclipse casting a strange quality to the light, a premature dusk that didn't belong in morning hours. "What are we going to say to him?" Jessica asked, her voice steady, despite the fear gnawing at her insides. "The truth," Michael replied simply. That we know about the underground facility, about the boys, about Sheriff Daniels' involvement. That it ends today, one way or another. They parked openly in Robert's driveway, making no attempt at stealth. This confrontation would happen in the light of day, with no more hiding or circling around the truth. The rifle remained in the truck, a last resort they hoped wouldn't be necessary. Robert opened the door before they could knock, his expression unsurprised. "Michael, Jessica, I was wondering when you'd make your grand appearance." He stepped aside. "Please, come in. We have much to discuss." The casual greeting after all they'd discovered was jarring. Jessica had expected denials, threats, perhaps even violence, not this calm acknowledgement of their presence. Robert led them to the back porch, offering seats as if this were a normal social call. "Beautiful day for an eclipse," he remarked, gesturing toward the sky. "A rare alignment, perfect for what needs to happen today." "What have you done to our sons?" Jessica demanded, unable to maintain the pretense of normalcy. Robert gazed at her thoughtfully. "You don't understand what's happening here," he said enigmatically. "None of you do." "Then explain it," Michael challenged, his voice tight with restrained fury. "I saw the boys that day," Robert admitted calmly. "They were playing hide-and-seek in the cornfield when they found something, a small opening in the ground leading to the old experimental chambers my father built decades ago. They were curious, as children are." His expression softened alarmingly. "They chose to stay." As he spoke, his demeanor shifted subtly, oscillating between rational explanation and something more disturbing. He referred to the twins as special seeds that needed specific conditions to flourish correctly. Michael stared at his brother in horror. "You're insane. Where are our sons? We want to see them now." Robert smiled serenely. "They're everywhere now, part of the land, part of the air you breathe." Jessica's attention was drawn to something glinting against Robert's chest, a key on a chain around his neck. With sudden clarity, she recognized it as identical to the lock they'd seen on the underground hatch in the cornfield. Robert noticed her gaze, and his demeanor changed instantly. With unexpected speed, he lunged at Michael, his previously calm facade shattering into violent rage. Their bodies collided, sending them crashing into a bookshelf against the wall. As the men struggled, Jessica seized the opportunity to grab a leather-bound notebook that had fallen from the disturbed shelf. She flipped it open, revealing pages of meticulous drawings and notes, disturbing illustrations of what appeared to be human-plant hybrids, alongside detailed observations of a 7-year human-vegetal experiment with repeated references to photosynthetic twins. Robert finally overpowered Michael, throwing him to the floor with surprising strength. He reached inside his jacket and pulled out a handgun, training it on both of them. "You've always been so predictable, Michael," Robert said, his voice eerily calm once more. "Both of you following the breadcrumbs exactly as expected. Now we're going to take a little trip to the basement. It's time you saw my boys properly." When Jessica fixates her gaze on the key hanging from Robert's neck, he follows her look, comprehends her discovery, and in a sudden, violent movement, attacks Michael, initiating a brutal fight while screaming, "You don't understand. They are my flowers now." Robert's face contorted with rage as he forced Jessica and Michael down the narrow staircase at gunpoint. The previously immaculate farmer had vanished entirely, replaced by a wild-eyed stranger who kept muttering about the culmination and perfect symbiosis. Jessica clutched the leather notebook against her chest, its pages still open to disturbing illustrations of human figures merged with plant systems. 7 years, Robert was saying, his voice oscillating between scientific detachment and religious fervor. 7 years of nurturing, of careful development. Do you have any idea how difficult it is to create the perfect conditions for human-plant hybridization? "You're sick, Robert," Michael responded, his voice tight with horror and revulsion. "You need help." Robert laughed, a chilling sound devoid of humor. "Help? I've revolutionized biological science. What you're about to witness has never been achieved in human history." The basement door opened to reveal not the root cellar or storage space Jessica had expected, but a sophisticated control room. The walls were lined with monitors displaying various angles of an underground complex, sterile corridors, hydroponic gardens glowing with artificial light, and most disturbingly, what appeared to be living quarters, where two pale figures moved in eerie synchronicity. "My boys," Robert said with disturbing pride, gesturing toward the central monitor. Jessica gasped, her knees nearly buckling at the sight. On the screen were Ethan and Noah, unmistakably her sons, despite 7 years of growth and change. Their once chubby child faces had elongated into teenage features, but their eyes, those identical brown eyes, were the same ones that had gazed adoringly at her 13 years ago when they were born. Their skin was unnaturally pale, almost translucent, and their movements had a dreamlike quality as they tended to rows of plants beneath specialized lighting. They wore matching gray clothing that resembled hospital scrubs, and their hair had grown long, falling past their shoulders in identical waves. "What have you done to them?" Jessica whispered, unable to tear her eyes from the monitor. "Enhanced them," Robert replied simply. "They're more than human now. Their cellular structure has been modified to perform limited photosynthesis. They can extract nutrients from soil through specialized capillaries I've cultivated in their extremities." He touched the screen reverently. "They're the first of their kind, a perfect hybrid of human consciousness and plant efficiency." Michael lunged at his brother with an anguished cry, but Robert was prepared. He sidestepped smoothly and brought the gun down hard against Michael's temple, sending him crashing to the floor. "Predictable as always, little brother," Robert sighed, gesturing for Jessica to help Michael into a chair. "Always reacting with emotion instead of appreciating the science." Jessica helped Michael up, his blood warm and sticky against her fingers where it trickled from his temple. She glanced desperately around the room, looking for anything that might serve as a weapon or means of escape. But Robert watched her too carefully. "Why?" Michael asked, his voice ragged. "They were children, Robert. Our children. Why would you do this to them?" Something shifted in Robert's expression, a flicker of what might have been regret, quickly replaced by righteousness. "You never deserved them," he said quietly. "Your perfect family, your identical sons. Do you know what our Father said when your twins were born? Finally, a pair of real Mitchell twins, not like you disappointments." Jessica stared at him in dawning comprehension. "This is about jealousy? You stole our children because you were jealous?" "It's about potential," Robert snapped. "Michael and I were fraternal twins, similar but fundamentally different cellular structures. But Ethan and Noah..." His voice softened again. "Identical, perfect matches, the ideal subjects for synchronized biological integration." He turned back to the monitors, adjusting settings that changed the camera angles. "It began as an experiment in nurturing hybrid organisms. My father started it decades ago, attempting to create plants with human-like neural pathways. He failed because he lacked the right subjects." Robert's eyes gleamed with unsettling pride. "I succeeded where he failed. The boys' identical DNA made them perfect recipients for the specialized spores I'd developed." Jessica's mind raced through the implications, her maternal horror competing with the need to keep Robert talking while she searched for an opportunity. "The Cornfield patterns," she said. "Did you create those?" Robert chuckled. "No, that was the boys, an unexpected development. Their connection to the plant systems became so integrated that they learned to influence growth patterns from below ground. Quite remarkable, really. They were trying to communicate. With us," Michael said, his voice strengthening. "They were calling for help." "They don't need help," Robert insisted, his calm demeanor cracking slightly. "They're thriving. Their physical health exceeds what would be expected after 7 years of traditional development. "They're prisoners," Jessica countered, inching closer to a desk where several tools were scattered. "No amount of enhancement justifies kidnapping and imprisonment." Robert waved the gun dismissively. "Narrow thinking. You see only what you've lost, not what they've gained. They can process light into energy now, Jessica. When the air quality eventually deteriorates beyond sustainability for traditional humans, they'll survive. They're the future." "They're children," Michael shouted, lurching forward in his chair before subsiding, obviously dizzy from his head wound. Robert ignored him, focusing on the monitor where the twins moved in their underground world. "The eclipse today marks the final phase," he explained, his voice taking on the cadence of a lecturer. 7 years of gradual cellular modification, and today, during the perfect alignment of sun and moon, they'll complete their transformation. The specialized spores I've cultivated require this precise light modulation to activate their final integration protocol. Jessica felt sick as the implications became clear. "You're going to do something to them during the eclipse." "With them, not to them," Robert corrected. "They're willing participants. They understand their importance." "They're brainwashed," Michael spat. "You've kept them underground since they were 6 years old, feeding them whatever lies suited your experiments." Robert smiled thinly. "You'll see soon enough. I've prepared a special place for you both in today's ceremony." He gestured toward the gun. "Now, it's time for you to join the boys. They've been asking about you recently. A biological response to the approaching culmination, I believe. Family recognition pathways reasserting themselves." He forced them out of the control room and down another staircase, this one spiraling deeper underground than seemed possible. The air grew increasingly humid and thick with the smell of vegetation and fertilizers. "I've prepared a viewing area," Robert explained as they descended. "You'll witness the transformation, then become part of the next phase yourselves. The boys will need nutrients during their final metamorphosis. Family DNA provides the most compatible building blocks." Jessica's blood ran cold at his implication. She glanced at Michael, whose face had gone ashen beneath the blood drying on his temple. Whatever Robert had planned for them would happen after the eclipse. They had perhaps 2 hours to escape and rescue the twins. The staircase ended at a sealed door with another keypad. Robert entered a code, and the door hissed open to reveal a small antechamber with 2 metal chairs bolted to the floor. A large observation window dominated one wall, looking into a larger chamber where elaborate plant systems surrounded 2 reclined seats that resembled medical examination tables. "Your accommodations," Robert gestured to the chairs. "I'm afraid restraints are necessary. Your parental instincts might override your scientific appreciation of the process." "Robert, please." Michael tried one last appeal. "This is madness. Whatever you think you're accomplishing, it's not worth destroying our family." "I'm not destroying it," Robert replied, securing them each to a chair with metal restraints. "I'm elevating it. The Mitchell family will be remembered as the genesis point of a new evolutionary branch." He checked his watch. "The eclipse begins in 45 minutes. I need to prepare the boys." With that, he locked them in the antechamber and disappeared through another door, leaving Jessica and Michael alone with the disturbing view of what appeared to be a ceremonial chamber prepared for their sons. "He's completely delusional," Michael whispered once Robert was gone. "Jessica, if we don't get out of here before the eclipse—" "I know," she replied, already testing the strength of her restraints. "The key around his neck. Did you see it? I think it opens these restraints as well as the hatch in the cornfield." Michael strained against the metal bands securing his wrists, but they held firm. "We need to get a message out somehow. Rivera might still be looking for us." Jessica twisted in her chair, scanning the small room for anything useful. The observation window was thick. bulletproof glass, most likely, and the only door was secured with both electronic and conventional locks. The room appeared to be communications-proof, without any visible technology they could exploit. The notebook, Jessica suddenly remembered. Before Robert attacked you, I grabbed his notebook. It fell next to my chair during the struggle. Michael twisted to look where she indicated. Sure enough, the leather-bound journal lay just at the edge of Jessica's reach if she stretched her foot as far as possible. Can you get it? Jessica extended her leg, straining against her restraints until her muscles screamed in protest. Her toe barely touched the edge of the book. With one final effort, she hooked it with her foot and dragged it closer until she could reach down just far enough to grasp it with her fingertips. It's all here, she breathed as she flipped through the pages with her partially free hand. Detailed records of everything he's done to the boys, calculations, procedures, observations. She paused on a page dated 7 years ago. Michael, listen to this. Subjects initially resistant to integration. Responded well to synchronized audio conditioning during sleep cycles. By week 3, began accepting nutrient solution through modified capillary system. Her voice broke. He's been documenting it all like some kind of twisted science experiment. We can use it against him, Michael said firmly. If we get out of here, that notebook is evidence. As they discussed potential escape plans, a movement on the monitors caught their attention. On one screen, they could see Robert entering a chamber where Ethan and Noah waited. The boys looked up simultaneously, their expressions unchanging as their uncle approached them with what appeared to be syringes filled with a greenish liquid. We're out of time, Jessica whispered desperately. He's starting whatever he planned for the eclipse. As they watched helplessly, Ethan and Noah suddenly shifted their attention, looking directly at one of the cameras, as if they knew they were being observed. Then, in perfect synchronization, they knelt on the floor and began scratching at the surface with their fingernails, creating deliberate marks in a pattern that seemed anything but random. While examining desperately the monitors seeking an escape route, Jessica and Michael noticed something extraordinary. The twins, who seemed to be in a trance, looked directly at one of the cameras and began to scratch the floor in a deliberate pattern. Not random, but a message or a map. A faint creaking sound pulled Jessica and Michael from their transfixed state. The basement door was opening. They quickly stopped struggling against their restraints and tried to appear subdued. Robert descended the stairs, now dressed in a denim overall identical to the ones the twins had been wearing when they disappeared 7 years ago. The sight sent a chill through Jessica's body. It's time, Robert announced, his voice eerily serene. In his hand, he held 2 syringes filled with a cloudy amber liquid. The alignment begins in 20 minutes. You'll both need to be prepared. Robert, please, Michael pleaded. Whatever you're planning to do, it's not too late to stop. Robert smiled, the expression never reaching his eyes. Stop, at the culmination of 7 years' work, when we're about to witness the birth of a new evolutionary branch? He shook his head. You always lacked vision, Michael. Always satisfied with mediocrity. He approached Jessica first, alcohol swab in hand. She struggled against her restraints as he cleaned a spot on her neck. This is a specialized sedative, Robert explained clinically. It will keep you conscious but compliant. You deserve to witness the transformation after all. You contributed half of their genetic material. The needle pierced Jessica's skin before she could twist away. A burning sensation spread from the injection site, followed by a wave of disorientation. The room seemed to tilt and blur around the edges, but she remained awake, trapped in a body that no longer responded to her commands. Robert administered the second injection to Michael, who fought violently until the drug took effect. When both were subdued, Robert released their restraints. Now we can proceed without these crude measures, he said, pocketing the key that hung around his neck. You couldn't escape now if you tried. Jessica found herself standing when commanded, her body moving independently of her will. Her mind remained clear, terrifyingly so, but her limbs responded only to Robert's directions. Michael walked beside her, his movements similarly wooden, his eyes reflecting the same trapped consciousness. Robert guided them up a different staircase than the one they had descended. This one was narrower, carved directly into the earth and reinforced with metal. It spiraled upward for what seemed like an eternity, until finally terminating at a hatch identical to the one they had discovered in the cornfield. "Beautiful timing," Robert commented, checking his watch as he pushed open the hatch. "The partial eclipse begins in 12 minutes. He helped them climb awkwardly through the opening. Jessica emerged into the circular clearing in the cornfield, the morning sun already noticeably dimmed as the moon began its transit. Around them, the cornfield stirred in a light breeze, the face-like patterns visible only to those who knew they were there. Robert had prepared the clearing. A circular depression had been dug in the center, lined with what appeared to be specialized growing medium. Strange metallic devices had been positioned around the perimeter, their purposes unclear but undoubtedly sinister in Jessica's mind. "Perfect symbiosis requires a joining," Robert explained as he busied himself checking equipment. "The boys have been prepared for 7 years, their bodies gradually modified to accept plant cellular structures. Today, with the unique light spectrum created during the eclipse, they'll fully integrate with the hybrid organisms I've developed." As he spoke, 2 figures emerged from the hatch. Jessica's heart contracted painfully at the sight of her sons, now teenagers, climbing slowly into the clearing. Ethan and Noah moved with identical, fluid grace, their pale skin almost translucent in the diminishing sunlight. They showed no reaction to seeing their parents, their eyes focused on the depression in the center of the clearing. "The sedative will begin to wear off shortly," Robert told Jessica and Michael as he positioned them at opposite sides of the circle. "Just enough for you to participate actively, but not enough to interfere." Jessica struggled to speak, her tongue heavy and uncooperative. "But please," she finally managed, "don't hurt them." Robert looked genuinely surprised. "Hurt them? I've done nothing but elevate them. Tonight, they become immortal, the first human consciousnesses to achieve permanent symbiosis with plant cellular structures." He gestured toward the strange equipment. "These nutrient infusers will extract compatible DNA from you and Michael to fuel the final transformation." Jessica's drugged mind struggled to make sense of his monologue as he continued explaining how always envied the perfect family of his brother, how he believed the twins were special, and how he had developed a method to fuse humans with plants in his underground system. "They breathe through the corn now," Robert explained calmly as he positioned the twins in the center depression. "Their roots are my roots." The boys lay down in the prepared soil, their movements mechanical yet graceful. They showed no fear, no awareness of anything unusual in this horrific scenario. Jessica noticed thin root-like structures extending from their fingertips into the soil, evidence of the monstrous modifications Robert had performed on their bodies. The eclipse progressed overhead, the light growing stranger by the minute. Robert moved methodically around the circle, making final adjustments to his equipment. The air in the clearing seemed to thicken, charged with an unnatural energy that made Jessica's skin crawl despite her drugged state. As Robert began some kind of ritualistic chant, combining scientific terminology with what sounded like ancient incantations, Jessica's mind raced desperately for some way to intervene. The sedative was indeed weakening. She could now move her fingers slightly, though her arms remained leaden. Through her foggy consciousness, a memory surfaced, the strange pattern the boys had scratched on the floor before Robert came for them. It had looked like random lines at first, but as Jessica concentrated, she began to make sense of it. The boys hadn't been drawing a map or escape route as she'd initially thought. They had drawn the astronomical symbol for a solar eclipse, a circle with a crescent, alongside what appeared to be a simple timepiece showing the midpoint of the eclipse. Sun and moon. "Remember the message?" she whispered to Michael, her voice barely audible over Robert's increasingly fervent chanting. "It's not a place. It's a time. Eclipse." Michael's eyes widened slightly, the only indication he had heard and understood. The eclipse was reaching its peak, the sky darkening to an eerie twilight. Robert stood at the head of the circle, arms raised, his face illuminated by the strange half-light. The sudden darkness disoriented Robert momentarily, interrupting his chant. In that crucial moment of distraction, Jessica forced her hand to move toward her boot, where she had concealed a small pocket knife earlier that morning, a precaution that now seemed prescient. Her fingers closed around the handle with agonizing slowness. Fighting through the sedative's effects, she managed to extract the knife and cut through the rope Robert had loosely bound around her wrists, anticipating the drug would keep her compliant. As the sky darkened further, Robert's attention focused entirely on the twins, who had begun to emit a faint, phosphorescent glow in the eclipse light. It was the opportunity Jessica needed. With strength born of maternal desperation, she launched herself at Robert, colliding with him just as he was about to administer some final solution to the twins. Robert staggered backward, shocked by the attack he thought impossible. Michael, also fighting through the sedative's effects, managed to rise and tackle his brother. The two men fell to the ground in a violent struggle, Robert's scientific demeanor giving way to animal fury. "You'll ruin everything," he screamed, his face contorted with rage. 7 years of preparation." Jessica scrambled toward the depression where her sons lay, still glowing faintly, their eyes vacant. "Ethan? Noah?" she called desperately, touching their faces. Their skin felt cool and slightly rubbery, like plant matter rather than human flesh. Behind her, Michael had managed to overpower Robert temporarily, pinning him to the ground. "Jessica, the hatch! Get the boys inside!" She looked to the open hatch, then back at her sons, who seemed rooted to the soil. Making a quick decision, she began pulling at Ethan first, trying to extract him from the growing medium. To her horror, she felt resistance, as if something below was holding him in place. "They're connected to something," she cried out. Robert laughed maniacally from where Michael held him. "Of course they are. The root system extends throughout the entire field. You can't separate them now. The integration has begun." Jessica refused to accept this. She dug around Ethan's body with her hands, ignoring the strange, ropey tendrils that had begun to entwine around his limbs. With a sickening tearing sound, she managed to free him enough to pull him toward the hatch. "Noah, help me with your brother," she pleaded, hoping to reach some part of her son's consciousness. To her amazement, Noah's vacant eyes focused slightly at the sound of her voice. "Mom, my..." The word emerged strange and halting, as if he had forgotten how to form human speech. "Yes, baby, it's me. We need to get you and Ethan out of here," Jessica urged, tears streaming down her face. With tremendous effort, Noah began to pull himself free from the soil, tearing away the unnatural connections Robert had cultivated. Jessica helped Ethan toward the hatch, then returned for Noah. Behind them, the struggle between Michael and Robert had intensified, both men bleeding from numerous wounds. Jessica helped her sons to the hatch, easing them down the ladder into the tunnel below. They moved awkwardly, like newborn foals learning to walk. But they were responding to her, recognition dawning in their eyes as the eclipse's strange influence began to wane. She descended quickly after them, finding herself in a dark tunnel, illuminated only by the faint glow still emanating from the twins' skin. Following instinct and the distant sound of breathing, she guided her sons through the darkness. After what seemed like an eternity, they reached a larger chamber illuminated by the sterile glow of cultivation lights. Jessica gasped at what she found. Her sons were connected to an elaborate system of tubes and plants, a horrific fusion of biology and technology. "Mommy," one of them whispered, his voice raspy from disuse. "You saw our faces in the sky?" Robert appeared at the entrance to the chamber, his face bloodied, his eyes wild with desperate rage. He took in the scene of Jessica disconnecting his specimens from their life support systems with a howl of despair. "You'll kill them!" he screamed, lunging forward. "They can't survive outside! They're my flowers now!" The twins reacted instinctively at the sight of Robert charging toward them, years of captivity triggering a survival response neither Jessica nor Michael could have anticipated. Ethan, though weakened from being disconnected from the elaborate system of tubes, grabbed a sharp gardening tool from a nearby workbench. Noah positioned himself protectively in front of his mother, his pale fingers wrapped around a metal rod used for plant support. "Stay away from us," Noah said, his voice stronger than before, recognition and awareness flickering in his eyes like a flame catching hold. Robert froze momentarily, confusion replacing rage as he stared at the twins. "You don't understand what you're doing," he pleaded, his tone shifting to one he might use to calm frightened animals. "The integration is incomplete. Without the final phase, your bodies will reject the modifications." Jessica stood between Robert and her sons, maternal instinct overriding any remaining effects of the sedative. "They're not your experiments, Robert. They're children. My children." "They're so much more than children now," Robert insisted, taking another step forward. "They're the future of human evolution. The perfect hybrid." Michael appeared behind Robert, blood streaming from a cut above his eye. He held a length of chain he'd torn from somewhere in the tunnel. "It's over, Robert. You're not touching them again." Robert spun to face his brother, his scientific demeanor crumbling completely to reveal the madness beneath. 7 years, he screamed, spittle flying from his lips. 7 years of perfect conditions, careful modifications, cellular integration. You can't take them now. He lunged at Michael, but the twins moved with unexpected coordination, flanking Robert from both sides. Years of abuse had crystallized into this moment of rebellion. With movements that seemed almost choreographed, they subdued their captor, Ethan swinging the gardening tool with enough force to send Robert crashing to the floor. "The nutrients," Noah gasped, suddenly doubling over in pain. "We need the sunlight solution." Ethan nodded, pointing to a refrigerated cabinet across the chamber. "The blue vials, just enough to stabilize." Jessica rushed to the cabinet, finding rows of neatly labeled containers. She grabbed 2 marked photosynthetic stabilizer, phase 6, her hands shaking as she brought them to her sons. "Will this help you get above ground?" she asked, watching as they administered the solution to themselves through patches on their inner arms, evidence of how Robert had trained them to maintain their own treatments. "Temporarily," Ethan explained, color gradually returning to his ashen face. "We need real sunlight eventually. Our bodies, they're different now." "We can explain later," Noah added, his eyes darting to where Robert lay groaning on the floor. "We need to leave now." Michael secured Robert with the chain, binding his arms and legs with tight knots. "He's not going anywhere," he assured them, though the uncertainty in his voice betrayed his concern that others, like Sheriff Daniels, might still pose a threat. They began the difficult journey upward, the twins struggling with each step after years of limited mobility. The narrow tunnels that had seemed impossibly complex before now felt like a closing trap, every shadow potentially hiding one of Robert's accomplices. "There's an exit," Noah whispered as they reached a junction. "Emergency route. Robert doesn't think we know about it." "We've been mapping the tunnels for years," Ethan explained, his voice stronger now. "Whenever he'd sedate us for procedures, we'd wake up early sometimes. Explore." They led their parents through a series of increasingly narrow passages until they reached what appeared to be a dead end. Ethan pressed his palm against a specific section of wall, and a panel slid open to reveal a ladder leading upward. "It exits in the old equipment shed," he said. away from the cornfield. Jessica went first, then helped pull each of her sons up the ladder. Their bodies felt wrong against her hands, too light, their skin too smooth, almost waxy in texture. What had Robert done to them that could never be undone? The question burned in her mind as she helped them emerge into the dusty interior of the abandoned shed. Michael came last, securing the hidden entrance behind them. Through cracks in the weathered wooden walls, they could see the farmhouse in the distance. Several vehicles were parked outside, including a sheriff's department cruiser. "Daniels," Michael whispered. "He must have realized something's wrong when Robert didn't report in." They waited in tense silence, watching as several figures emerged from the house and spread out across the property, clearly searching. The eclipse was ending, normal daylight gradually returning to illuminate their pursuers. "We'll never make it to the car," Jessica realized aloud. "They're between us and the driveway." "The back field," Ethan suggested, pointing in the opposite direction. "There's a road beyond the north pasture. Robert uses it for delivery sometimes." Michael peered through a gap in the wall. "It's our best chance. We'll stay in the tree line along the edge of the property." Jessica removed her outer shirt, tearing it into strips. "Wrap these around your heads and hands," she instructed the twins. "Your skin, it's too noticeable in the sunlight." The boys complied, something like a smile flickering across Noah's face. "You always made us wear sunscreen at the beach," he remembered, the simple, childlike memory incongruous with their current situation. Jessica's heart clenched painfully at this glimpse of her son beneath the horror of Robert's experiments. "Always wanted to protect you," she managed to say past the lump in her throat. They slipped out the back of the shed, keeping low as they darted toward the line of trees that marked the property boundary. The twins moved with surprising speed now that they were above ground, their bodies seeming to respond to the natural light despite Robert's warnings. They had nearly reached the trees when a shout rang out behind them. One of the searchers had spotted their movement. Without looking back, they raced into the forest, branches whipping at their faces as they pushed deeper into the cover of the trees. The sounds of pursuit followed them, crashing footsteps, crackling radios, dogs barking in the distance. Jessica's lungs burned as she ran, keeping pace with Michael, who had taken Noah's hand to help him over fallen logs and through tangled underbrush. Ethan ran just ahead, somehow knowing which way to go despite having been underground for 7 years. They broke from the tree line into an open field, the promised access road visible on the far side. As they sprinted across the exposed ground, Jessica heard the unmistakable sound of vehicles approaching from both directions. "There!" She pointed to a drainage culvert running beneath the road. "We can hide until they pass." They scrambled down the embankment and into the concrete tunnel, pressing themselves against the curved walls as car engines rumbled overhead. Through the circular opening, Jessica could see a sheriff's vehicle stop directly above them. Doors opened, footsteps crunched on gravel. "They can't have gotten far," a voice she recognized as Sheriff Daniels said. "The boys are weak without their support systems. Robert was clear about that." Another voice responded, too low to make out the words. The twins pressed closer to Jessica, their bodies trembling, whether from fear or physiological stress, she couldn't tell. Just when it seemed they would be discovered, a familiar voice called out from the distance. "Police! State Bureau of Investigation! Drop your weapons!" Detective Rivera's voice, followed by the sound of car doors slamming and hurried footsteps as Daniels and his deputies scrambled to respond to the unexpected intervention. "Jessica! Michael!" Rivera called out after several tense minutes. "If you can hear me, it's safe to come out." They emerged cautiously from the culvert to find Rivera standing beside several state police officers, Sheriff Daniels and his deputies handcuffed and seated on the ground nearby. "Ernesto contacted me," Rivera explained, her eyes widening as she took in the appearance of the twins. "He was worried when he couldn't reach you, so he called my personal number. Said something terrible was happening at the farm today." Jessica moved protectively closer to her sons, uncertain how much to explain about their condition. "They need medical attention," she said. "Specialized care." Rivera nodded, her professional demeanor momentarily slipping as she truly registered the sight of the boys who had been missing for 7 years. "We have an ambulance standing by, and I've contacted a medical team that specializes in unusual cases." "Robert?" Michael asked. "Officers found him restrained in the underground chamber," Rivera confirmed. "He's being taken into custody. The entire property is being secured as a crime scene." In the days that followed, the full extent of Robert's experiment was revealed. Medical experts were baffled by the modifications to the twins' bodies, some irreversible, others potentially treatable with time. They were taken to a specialized facility where doctors worked to understand and address their unique physiological needs, while psychologists began the delicate process of helping them reintegrate into the world. 6 months later, Robert's farm had been transformed. The cornfields where the twins had been hidden were now gone, replaced by carefully designed therapeutic gardens surrounding a rehabilitation center for traumatized children. The underground chambers had been filled in, buried beneath tons of concrete, a literal and metaphorical sealing away of the horrors that had occurred there. Jessica and Michael, reunited by shared trauma and their son's ongoing recovery, walked together through the central garden, where Ethan and Noah spent several hours each day. The twins were still painfully thin, their skin retaining an unusual pallor, but they were undeniably improving. They sat together on a bench positioned carefully to catch the maximum amount of natural sunlight. Jessica noticed, as she had many times before, how they always chose places where they could see the sky. "How did you survive down there all those years?" she asked gently, settling beside them on the bench. Ethan looked up from the small plant he was tending. His hands were steadier now, though they still bore the faint traces of the modifications Robert had made. "Noah and I made tunnels to the surface, just enough to see a piece of the sky. Uncle Robert always closed them, but not before we planted special seeds that would grow in a pattern only visible from above." "We hope someone was looking from the sky," Noah added, his gaze meeting Jessica's. "And you were." As the family walked together toward the small house they now shared on the rehabilitation center grounds, Jessica paused by the shelf where her retired drone sat, a relic of her desperate search. She smiled at the twins who had moved ahead with Michael, their thin frames silhouetted against the evening light. "Some seeds," she said quietly. "No matter how deeply buried, we'll always find a way to the light."